Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I can see attendees have logged in or are still logging in, but it looks like the flow is slowed down, so I think we'll get started. Welcome, everyone, to our Peninsula Live webinar today. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. Next slide. The topic of today's webinar is how to manage the trickiest parts of human resources. And whether you work in a firm or own one, dealing with human resources or occupational health and safety can be one of the hardest parts of your job. And on today's webinar, you'll learn how to manage even the trickiest HR and OHS issues. Today's session is intended to be live and interactive, so please ask any questions you may have throughout using the question box as I'll be monitoring them. And I'll take note of all of the questions that you have for our panelists to address at the end of the session. My name is Aileen Dausavan, and I am on the Events and Partnerships team here at Peninsula, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Andrew and Shelley, today. And next slide, let me tell you about today's speakers. Andrew Caldwell, HR Advisory Manager. Andrew is a certified human resources professional with extensive HR consulting experience. He's responsible for ensuring Peninsula's clients enjoy the same market-leading service the group is renowned for. Andrew's expertise is often sought after by the media on HR and employment relations issues. He has appeared on CP24, CTV News, and in publications such as the Toronto Star, Vancouver Sun, CBC, the Globe and Mail, and HRD Canada. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us today. And I will let the group know that we are having some technical difficulties with our panelist, Brian, today. But I am happy to welcome you, Shelley, to the webinar as well. Shelley is a business development manager here at Peninsula. She's dedicated to helping small and medium-sized businesses manage HR, employment relations, and OHS compliance. She's helped hundreds of businesses access 24/7 HR advice and ensure their employment burdens are taken care of, leaving employers free to see the big picture and focus on the success of the organizations. Shelley, thank you for joining us today. And as I mentioned, we are having technical difficulties with Brian, but if he is able to join us, I will be sure to hop back on and introduce you to Brian. Now, Shelley, I'll hand it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Aileen. And again, thanks everyone for joining. We are going to do our best today to not only take you through what this partnership is, right, what this means for you and what ACEC has created, but we're going to go through some sort of key expert advice. So just to start off explaining what the partnership is we currently have with ACEC. So Peninsula Canada, our group here is an HR and health and safety consulting firm. We serve over 5,000 small businesses across Canada. Our clients receive ongoing updates of their employment contracts, employee handbooks, policies, and certainly as legislation evolves, which we know it's constantly on the move, we keep our clients up to date. Okay, so we're certainly thrilled to explain the partnership today, and we are really impressed with the group and what we've put together. We certainly hope you're equally as impressed as we are. So our partnership currently with ACEC is to provide human resources solutions to the members and to you. We are dedicated to protecting your business, giving the tools you need to succeed. As an ACEC Ontario member, you're also eligible for preferred pricing. Okay, this is based on all of our services, either HR or health and safety. And when you combine the services, you can certainly have some peace of mind where it comes to the safety of your staff and your workplace. Now, again, when it comes to Peninsula, the expertise that we have is genuinely shared with you, right? So basically this means our expertise is at your fingertips. So anytime you need support on HR or health and safety, we are a quick phone call away. Now, based on the membership, what we've done is we've actually created a dedicated phone line for all ACEC Ontario members. So if anything pops up, when it comes to HR, health and safety inside your workplace, please feel free to reach out at any time. So the number that you can access is here, so please do write that down. Again, simply call the number and our team would be happy to advise. Okay, now before we get into today's agenda, it looks like Brian has joined us, which is great news. So Aileen, if you don't mind, let's go back and give Brian a nice warm intro.
Absolutely. Lorena, are you able to unmute Brian? It looks like he's unmuted or self-muted, Brian. I can't seem to unmute you, Brian. Can you unmute yourself? Okay, we gave it a try, Shelley. We're going to try it again, but thank you. We will come back to Brian potentially before his session, so
Oh,
we can just continue with the agenda.
Oh,
Oh,
hello,
Brian. Hi, Brian. Okay. Well, so
can
welcome,
anybody
Brian,
hear me?
maybe. Yes, we can. Thank you. That was a
I
close one.
can't hear anybody.
Okay. We can hear you, Brian.
Have-
So I'll just introduce Brian to the webinar. So Brian is a seasoned HR professional who understands small business operations. Using his experience in occupational health and safety and employment compliance, he's helped hundreds of small business owners meet OHS requirements, create safe workplaces, and manage workplace violence and harassment. So Brian is still having some difficulties, so I will hop off and I will assist him with that while we continue the webinar. Thanks, everybody.
fantastic. So as you can see, we're definitely more prone to assistance in the HR and health and safety space, certainly not the IT space, but that's okay. So we're going to get Brian up and running, but as we kind of continue with today's presentation, you can, and so you understand what you can expect today. So we're going to cover certainly HR, human resources, and this is where Andrew will take you through our HR slides. Okay, now following up on that, if we are able to get Brian up and running, he's certainly going to provide you with updates on the health and safety side of our service. If not, I'm certainly happy to take you through that myself. Now, throughout the presentation, please don't hesitate. Ask any questions that you may have. That is what we are here for. We want to make sure that it's more about you than it is about us. So jump in anytime. There is a chat box. Please do feel free to use that, okay? Aileen and I will be monitoring those and ensure certainly at the end that Andrew and Brian are able to answer any of your questions. Now, without any further delay, Andrew, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and pass everything over to you.
Thanks, Shelley. So thank you for joining us today. I'll be chatting briefly about human resources and some of the importance that you might need, especially as an engineering firm, and individuals who hire engineers and those who are not engineers, and the differences that you'll need to be aware of. So as we go into it, the first thing I'd really like you all to do is think about a question. So when was the last time that you had your contracts and professionally drafted? Have they been drafted by an employment professional, such as an employment lawyer? Did you get them online? Where did you find them? And then when was the last time you reviewed your contracts? Have you double checked that they're compliant? There's a lot of acts that apply to these things, and sometimes you may not be aware of them. So it's really crucial to get them reviewed, I'd say almost yearly. So think about that as we go through these slides, because I think this is a very important question that you should have in the back of your mind. And as we move forward onto our next slide, I'll give you some of the indication as to why. The contract itself, much like you would have with any of a business that you're providing services to or getting services from, determines the terms and conditions, just what you want with your employees, right? They're going to make a salary. You have a certain expectation of what they're going to do on their end. Same with the employee handbook. That is a way that the company determines their playbook. Here's how we want you to call in sick, or here's how you book vacation. These are the vacations you're entitled to. This is when you can't take vacation. That's all determined within the handbook. And then the documentation of warning letters or promotion letters, or someone's taken a leave, you've documented it. All of the documentation that you do, contract, handbook, policies, and letters or emails, control the narrative for the employer. In employment law and employment standards, it's oftentimes that the employer is viewed as guilty until proven innocent. Now, I say this just to not to scare anybody, not to say, "Ooh, beware." It just to give you a good understanding, and that's why documentation is so important. When an issue arises with an employee, you always want to go back to what your handbook is. You want to have history behind you. How have we dealt with things in the past? How have we documented it? And here's our examples. That is the key way to be protected. And these should all be set out in these terms and conditions. Next slide, please. So it's all about protecting your business, and that's where the contract comes in. As I said before, you don't want to go into business with someone without a contract, just like you wouldn't want to have with your employee. And so these are the things that go for it. Legal our clients, 20% of them before they joined with us did not have what I would say legally enforceable contracts, and those 27% that did are no longer legally valid because of laws have changed since they've joined us. 37 have had contracts, but they weren't drafted by a professional. They found them online, and so they were drafted by a professional, but you may not know if they were actually legally viable or not. And then when they were getting sources, they go to an employment lawyer or Google and other search engines. And that's okay. You can find some information online, but then employment standards and law and employees in general are nuanced. Every situation is going to be a little bit different. Your business is going to be different than the one that you're searching. Your employee is going to be different than the one that was in that example. The lawyer that was looking at it was arguing from a certain perspective as to that. The standards are there. So when you look at these things, you have to understand the nuance behind all of them. Just as, you know, as a new parent, I'm learning. Books tell me one thing, my child does something else. And so the nuance, each individual is always going to be different, and you have to account for that when you're dealing with employees. On the next slide, please. So you'll hear this a lot come into play when we talk about employment standards, an act or a code versus common law. What are the distinctive differences? So common law is the judiciary system. It's set by courts and judges and precedent. What has happened in the past is how we're going to determine it going forward. So it looks for, again, commonalities with the employee situations that they can apply. Has this happened in the past? Has it gone to court? What was the ruling at that point? Is it relatively the same? If so, we're going to follow that same ruling. Whereas employment standards is set by government. It is the standards to which is the minimum. It's the floor. If we were building a house for employment, they would be the bottom, and then we'd build up from that. And that's common law, is going above and beyond. And so you'll hear if an employee is terminated and they argue it and it goes to court, that they'll get oftentimes anywhere from 4 to 5 weeks per year of service, and that is under common law. And so that common law notice period is often greater than employment standards. And so that is really where it comes into play. And that is the point that you want to highlight, is without a contract that limits an employee to the employment standards minimum, there's a good chance that they can go to an employment lawyer and seek greater rewards for being terminated. Or even if it's not getting terminated, maybe you need to change the business up and you need to get someone to do a new job. There's a term of constructive dismissal that you need to be careful about, and that can fall into a common law realm as well. So all of these things you need to be aware of. And in order to fall under employment standards, you need a contract that binds that employee to it, that they've agreed to it. Next slide, please. So some of the key points that we're going to talk about in a contract is a probationary period. This is a time that an employer uses to see if the employee is a viable candidate for their employment. Do they know the skills for the job? Are they actually a good fit? Maybe the person's a really good employee. They are so productive, but their attitude is not great. They're toxic. So that's the time that you can start to pick these things apart, and you can see if you're going to keep that person on or not. Now, why do you want a probationary period in writing? Is because a probationary period doesn't actually exist in employment standards. What a probationary period is in employment standards is the first 3 months of employment. Within the first 3 months of employment, an employer can determine if they're going to keep an employee or not, and if they choose not to, they're not required to provide any notice to that employee. And so we've kind of layman terms that we've just kind of codified it in general public as a probationary period. And that's why it's important to have it in a contract, because now it's written. And no longer being an assumed understanding, it's in writing. You know the length, you know it's clear, it's not ambiguous, the time frame is there, and they've agreed to it. So a probationary period is crucial. You can have a 6-month probationary period, but you can't terminate that person after 3 months without notice. So again, these are terms and conditions that you need to have someone review and make sure that they are compliant. Next slide. Layoffs. No business ever wants to go into business understanding that they have to do a layoff. A layoff is not a termination. It is a temporary time or a temporary stoppage of work. Maybe you're waiting for a new project to come in, or you've just finished a project, but you don't have nothing. You have nothing lined up for the next project. So instead of terminating staff, because then you got to go through rehiring and you may lose potential skills, if you have a clause in your contract, you can temporarily lay off an employee, which says, hey, this is a temporary shortage of work. You'll be returning to work in a short period of time. And then they can return. That is a standard clause that you want in all of your contracts. If you don't have it, technically within Ontario, you have to get the employee to agree to a layoff. And if they choose not to agree to a layoff, then you can't lay them off. You're ultimately ended with terminating them. Now, again, it becomes a conversation. Then it becomes a little bit more nuanced. Then it becomes a back and forth. And then it becomes what's documented. So if you have a clause in your contract, you can avoid all of that. And it just becomes, what is the business need? Why do we need to do the layoff? We're doing the layoff, and it's for a temporary time frame. This is important. This was, unfortunately, really a crucial thing that a lot of employers didn't have at the time of COVID. When COVID hit and the government was doing shutdowns, thankfully, because the government was doing it, the employers were off the hook. But a lot of cases went to court where there was no layoff clause. The employee assumed that they were terminated and the employee won. So it's crucial to have a layoff clause in your termination. You may never want to use it, but it's better to have it than to not have it and have to use it. Next slide, please. So again, just like layoffs, no one ever goes into a contract with the understanding that they're going to terminate this person. But unfortunately, relationships do deteriorate either from work, maybe you don't have enough work for the person, or the company's grown in a way that the person's there is not meeting the demand, or maybe that person just wants to leave and they're choosing to resign. A resignation is still an end of employment. It's on the employee's choice. Now, what needs to be clear there is that we want to get something in writing to make it understood and documented that it was the employee's choice, not the employer, right? If an employer makes changes to a job or makes the environment unconducive for someone to come in and work, that employee potentially has a chance to say they were constructively dismissed. My job was changed, or the environment was so toxic or unconducive for work that I was forced to resign. At which point, if they are successful in making that claim or stating it, and again, you have nothing documented to disprove it, they could claim constructive dismissal, which is treated as a termination, and you're owing that person termination pay. So resignations are not as always clear cut as they might be, but what you always want to do is get it in writing and validate that the employee has chosen to resign and that it is their choice. Once it is in writing, accept it in writing. Say, thank you for your resignation, we accept it. Now, if they don't put it in writing, but they verbalize it to you and you have witnesses, still put it in writing on your end. Again, controlling the narrative. Who's documenting it? Who has that side of the story? What is in history? That's what you want documented. Next slide, please. Now, if it's not the employee's choice and it's your choice to terminate the employee, there's things that you want to look at when determining it. Industry, position, behavior, history. The reason why these things come into play is, for example, engineers do have a lot of things that they are exempt from under employment standards, such as minimum wage, daily hours of work, rest periods, overtime pay. Engineers are not entitled to it, but they are entitled to termination notice, whereas construction employees are not entitled to termination notice, but entitled to overtime pay. So knowing the industry and the job that the person does is important to understand what entitlements do they get, especially around termination. If you don't have a contract, these factors such as age, nature of the job, location, and likelihood of finding gainful employment of similar or like nature factor into the common law notice period that I was talking about earlier. An older employee at a higher position with less jobs in the marketplace, harder to find a job, is going to see a greater notice around that 6-week mark per year of service, which is uncapped more or less. So it's always crucial to have it documented and minimize it to the ESA minimums. Now, another thing to understand is, when do you want to do termination, with cause or without cause? With cause is such egregious behavior from the employee that the employer is left with no other recourse but to terminate this person. And it's falling under 3 categories. willful misconduct, disobedience, or willful neglect of duty that is not trivial nor condoned by the employer. How can we prove something's not trivial or not condoned? Documentation. As much as we can document, as many times as we can document, proves that we weren't condoning it. But willful is the key term. Can you prove someone was willfully doing something, purposely going out to damage the business? It's very hard to prove. So with cause terminations, very hard to prove and very hard to defend. And again, when it comes to termination, if it ever goes to a lawyer or to the court or to the Ministry of Labor, an employer is guilty until proven innocent. And that's where your documentation comes in. So having a solid contract with a good, clear termination clause within it that has been reviewed and updated and make sure that it is valid is money saving to the business. Next slide, please. The employee handbook. So earlier I was mentioning that the handbook is the playbook. The contract is for the individual. The handbook is for the company. It's going to determine how do you want to operate as a company with all your employees. So some of these things that are in there are attendance, leaves, discipline, vaccination policy, if you're going to have one, social media policy, which if you don't have a social media policy this day and age, you might as well just be, tying your hands behind your back. You need to have one. It's so crucial. Maybe your employees are posting online with your logo and they're, talking about vaccines and how it's, impacting the world and anything of that nature. So social media is becoming more and more politicized. And if they have your logo on it, your company then becomes associated with it. So having a policy around it, and that would be in your handbook, to which you can update at any time without having to necessarily get the employee's consent, is crucial. Next slide, please. So updating your documents. At the start of my little spiel here, and I'm sorry if I'm talking too much or not answering any of your questions, but I asked you to really kind of look back to, do you have professionally drafted documents? When was the last time that was reviewed? Now that we've kind of gone through this, you can see why you want to have it updated routinely. When was the last time you did have your documentation updated? And then on top of that is, how often should you have it updated? My stance is every year you should be reviewing it. But then when do you have that time? A handbook is typically anywhere from 30 to 60 pages, and then you've got an individual contract for each employee. How often are you reviewing those? When do you have the time, right? It's so crucial that you do it, but time is also money. So how do you have that time where you're shifting your focus from the aspects of your business to managing these type of things? So that's why it's important. And it's so crucial to have these. And as I said, nuanced, humans are humans, interaction is going to be nuanced, the way you manage business is going to be different. All of those factors combined means it's really important to get your documentation updated and maintained, and that you utilize it successfully. Next slide, please. Legislation to be aware of. I talked about employment standards, and then Brian's going to chat about occupational health and safety, but the other things you want to talk about are Human Rights Code, Canadian Labor Code, the Pay Equity Act, the AODA, which was rolled out about a decade ago, and they're still rolling out aspects of it. All of these things impact your interaction with your employee. And that means not only do you need to be up to speed on employment standards, for the Act, the Occupational Health and Safety, but then you need to be up to speed on the Human Rights Code, the Canadian Labor Code, Pay Equity Act, the AODA in Ontario, and then the previous Freedom of Information and Privacy Act. Again, going back to how often are you updating your documentation and maintaining it? Do you have the time to go through all 5, 6 of these acts to make sure your documentation is compliant? Human rights interacts with every single human employee that you've got. Probably non-human employees too if you've got them, but main point is the human employee and the interaction and the nuanced. Every situation is going to be different, and every interaction is going to be different, but your approach can remain the same, and then your documentation should remain the same. And that's it for my slides, I believe, and then I think it goes on to Brian. If you have any questions, there will be a time at the end for myself or for Brian, and Brian, take it away.
So this is an overview of basic health and safety minimum requirements for Ontario. And it'll vary, the next slide sort of goes into a little bit more detail, but these requirements vary based on the number of employees your business has. But even basic small businesses in that 1 to 5 employee range basically have all of these requirements on this list, with the exception of maybe a health and safety rep. Most of these will apply to any and all businesses in the workplace. And although some of these requirements on the list, for example, progressive discipline policy, you may not find legislation that says you specifically have to have that, but it's the type of policy that you want to have. As Andrew mentioned earlier, it's part of a playbook, and it establishes a protocol that you expect employees to follow. And it's just one of those policies that I believe every business should have. And the rest of these, basically they cover all of the documentation requirements of the Green Book. If we open up the Green Book, or the, that's the Occupational Health and Safety Act, commonly referred to as the Green Book. But it'll state that every business has documentation requirements, training requirements, accident incident tracking requirements. So there's a lot of moving parts. The idea is you just want to address everything that applies to your business based on the number of employees you have and the type of business you're in. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier that largely those minimum requirements are based on the size of the business. So the Ministry of Labour will categorize any business in Ontario into one of 3 groups. You either have 1 to 5 employees, you have 6 to 19, or 20 and over. And the requirements and obligations change as the number of employees increase. But based on that 1 to 5 category, you want to address basically everything in your health and safety manual that identifies any risks in the workplace. You obviously want to have your health and safety policy and statement put together, a work refusal. Those are also workplace posting requirements. So some of these documents, you're required to have a written document, or digital format will work as well. But some of them are also required to be posted in the workplace, and that would be the likes of a health and safety policy, a work refusal, violence and harassment policies. Those policies should also be updated on an annual basis. We would actually recommend that the entire OHS program be reviewed on an annual basis, along with any training that has to be updated. Health and Safety Board should also be updated on an annual basis, just to ensure that it's capturing all the required documentation. Next slide, please. So this I sort of covered just a couple of minutes ago there, but I'll just go over it again. That first category actually has more than just 1 to 19. There's a subcategory in there of 1 to 5 employees, where basically you're required to meet all the requirements of the Green Book, but you're not required to have a health and safety rep yet at that point. Once the business moves into that 6 to 19 category, then you're required to meet all the same requirements in the 1 to 5 category, but now you would elect a health and safety representative. Keyword there being elect. The ministry wants the health and safety rep to be a true voice of the employees. So ideally, the workers will elect their health and safety rep, and hopefully the individual is interested in taking on that role. You want somebody that takes it to heart and is actually going to do it justice and carry out any of the monthly requirements. Once you exceed, in that 6 to 19, yeah, you've got the same requirements as 1 to 5, but with the health and safety rep. And then when you exceed 20 employees, now you're into the category where you're required to have a joint health and safety committee, which requires 1 management representative and again, an elected worker representative. both of which would require Joint Health and Safety Committee training and certification. It's a two-part program, but the minimum requirement for that committee is 2, and it has to be at least 50% worker-based. So you could have more than 2 members, you could have 3, 4 members, but at least 50% or more have to be worker reps. It's actually advised to have additional worker reps anyway. It helps to cover if people are off on holidays or working different shifts or something along those lines. And then as the number of employees increases again for larger businesses at 50 plus, there's another threshold where there's additional representatives required. That threshold also at 199 to 200 employees becomes another threshold. And first aid requirements will vary as well. As the business grows in size, so do the first aid requirements. Next slide. So this is basically sort of covering the health and safety rep responsibilities. And the health and safety rep, as well as a joint health and safety committee rep, basically has the main functionality is to be a voice for the rest of the workers, to basically represent them at any sort of meetings or dealings with management as it relates to health and safety. But there's a lot of functionality to what they should be doing on a monthly basis. This is some of those items there: recognize and document workplace hazards, evaluate the hazards and risks that can cause incidents and injuries. Basically what they're doing is participating in the health and safety process all the way through, from the point where something gets presented as a concern in the workplace to implementing, resolve, and solving that concern. And this, at the end of the day, really is engaging your workforce, and that's really what you want to do. An effective health and safety program is filtered from top down, and if you want a great health and safety record, you need buy-in from the workforce. It's got to start at the top, but filter down and buy-in from all the workers. The health and safety rep and responsibilities sort of gives you those guidelines of what that individual should be doing on a monthly basis. Next slide. So this has become more of a common problem in the last few years, dealing with discrimination and harassment in the workplace. The basic, your best bet for trying to eliminate that is obviously just respecting people's rights in the workplace, treating everybody in a fair manner, but having a proper harassment, anti-harassment, anti-discrimination, violence in the workplace policy, and doing the ongoing annual training is a great way to work towards eliminating these problems in the workplace. It gets people talking about any problems, first of all, but it sort of also identifies what is discrimination, harassment, and violence in the workplace, because there's a difference between, a business trying to get something accomplished in the workplace and having an employee view that as, them being discriminated upon. It's truly understanding what is discrimination in the workplace and harassment in the workplace, but having employees sign off on a policy so that everybody recognizes what the expectations are in the workplace goes a long way to preventing these issues from happening in the first place. Steps for conducting an investigation. Obviously, you want to keep that to just the parties involved. Privacy should be of the utmost importance there. But you put a plan together, inform all the staff of what's taking place. Obviously, you want to interview everybody involved, anybody that may be either a witness or part of the investigation. And then you just have to review and come to a conclusion that's going to be the best outcome for all parties involved. If there's corrective actions to implement, they get implemented, and those parties that need to be in the know are involved in the resolution. Next slide. So this is actually just kind of a more of a question, I suppose. When it comes to occupational health and safety, businesses have many different avenues they can follow to try and accomplish this. Many will hire an individual in-house to manage health and safety. Some use an outsourced program. There's always the Google option, and there's other friends in the business or whatnot. But we did a little bit of a poll prior to this webinar, and with our clients prior to coming to Peninsula, we found that about 10% used in-house health and safety experts, so that's hiring somebody to manage it for them. 31 used just an in-house designate, so somebody that got to wear the health and safety hat and basically became responsible for looking after it. 17% were outsourced, so that would be to an outsourced program similar to ourselves. 24% relied on Google. The problem there is Google will give you too many answers sometimes, and it makes it difficult to determine what's best for yourself. And then there's the 19% that have friends or somebody in the business or in the know that tends to help them out. We'd like your opinion as to what your method was in the past, and moving forward, we'd like you to consider the option of Peninsula. We provide a very professional level overview, and when you're in your line of work in the engineering business, there is no doubt a lot of hazards and moving parts, and this is just a great way to ensure that if something does happen in the workplace, you're compliant if something has to be reported. I believe that might be the last slide.
Fantastic.
I'll hand it back over to Shelley.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much. And certainly thank you, Andrew, before Brian. It's a lot of heavy information, right? We're talking about some really important things. Number one, keeping our employees safe. I'm not sure there should really be any more goals in our business before we move past that first goal, right? We need to make sure people are safe. Once we know that our employees are in a good place, everyone's safe, we're following the Occupational Health and Safety Act, so therefore we are compliant. Now we always want to make sure that we're protecting our own business, right? Protecting the investment, protecting our plans for growth. We don't want to end up in situations where the unknown happens, and we don't want too many surprises. As you can imagine, our goal here at Peninsula is to reduce that risk, right? There's 4 key things that we do to ensure that you're not only compliant, but you always have the ability, number one, to provide proof. You always have a team here to lean on so that you're guided in the right direction. We keep things organized, and we certainly partner on everything with you with some legal protection. So the first way we do all of this is with documentation. Very important. Brian was talking about documentation explicitly, as was Andrew. So anything from your employment contracts through to your workplace policies or that handbook, like Brian mentioned, this is where we house our workplace policies. It's the playbook. It's how we run the business. It's how we avoid arguments, right? We're going to set out expectations around vacation time, sick days, social media policies, dress codes, you name it, right? Anything that we need to ensure that we are protecting the business. Now comes the health and safety documentation. So this is where Brian's team would be helping and creating your health and safety manual. Okay, so we do have different requirements that have to be followed from OHSA standpoint, and different policies, anything from lone worker policies, remote work policies, driving for work, cell phone policies. Where's your cell phone stored while you're driving? Very important. Some things seem obvious. They feel like there's common sense attached to them. However, if you don't have it in writing, you actually don't have an ability to prove that common sense, okay? So now that we've prepared you with documents, we have you in a great position and you feel compliant, now we have to work together moving forward. Every day is different. Every situation is different. I've never had a conversation with 2 clients that were identical, okay? This is where our advice line comes in. Now, Brian and Andrew have 2 teams that we work with. So there's the HR team, there's the health and safety team. So we want to make sure you're speaking to an agent that is up to speed on your questions. You can call our 24-hour advice line anytime you want. There's no maximum. We're not going to tell you that you've exceeded your minutes. Call us anytime. I explain to my clients that I want them to put our number in their phone so that even if they're just on their way to a staff meeting, they're not 100% sure on how to word something, or we have something tricky coming up. Maybe you need to conduct a termination. Maybe you have someone going on maternity leave. These things all come with questions. We don't exactly always know how to handle them on our own. So this is where Peninsula's team comes and we guide you. We become your partner in HR. We become your partner in health and safety. And we ensure that you are always going in the right direction and respecting all of the various areas of law that Brian and Andrew explained. Okay? Now we need to keep you organized. We don't want things lost. We don't want contracts lost. We want to be able to manage employee sick days. We want to be able to manage upcoming vacation requests. We want to respect privacy policies, ensure that all of your employees' contracts are stored properly. And certainly on the safety side of things, we need to make sure that you have a way for an employee to report a hazard or conduct a risk assessment. So these are the moving parts. Once we have your program in place, once we're there advising you and guiding you along the way, we now have a software solution that would also provide you the ability to manage this program, okay? It's really, I think, how we help simplify it. We do communicate to our clients through that software. That's where we will store the documents that we've created for you. So you don't have to worry about whose desk was it on last or how much dust is on the top of your health and safety manual, okay? Now, the next piece is, I think, a really beautiful component of our service. It really speaks to, I think, our confidence in what we do here at Peninsula. So Peninsula Protect is a legal protection. We call it a service promise. So what we're basically promising to our clients is that the documents we prepare, the advice that we give, and the way that we organize the solution for you is absolutely compliant with all of these areas of law. So if something were to go wrong, okay, so let's use the example, we've conducted a termination, we've assisted your firm in conducting that termination. You've been taking our advice, you've implemented our documents. Now Peninsula Protect would cover you if the employee did choose to move forward with a claim or a lawsuit, okay? So Peninsula Protect does cover our clients up to $125,000 in legal protection, and it maxes out at $500,000 per year. Now, it's important to note, this does not cover pre-existing issues, so it's always a really good idea to work with Peninsula early. Let's work to prevent, not try to jump in and help after the situation. Although we can do both efficiently, it's certainly better for both sides if we have you in a good position to start. So we can certainly move on to the next slide. That is Peninsula in a nutshell. Before I get into a quick little conversation about our software, I think that there was a question that came in. Eileen, if you don't mind going through the question, and we'll make sure that either Brian or Andrew get them the best answer.
Yeah, perfect, Shelley. So the question that came in, do you provide training to staff when a health and safety manual is rolled out?
Great question. Brian, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. We do, and what we include, it's included, the way we roll it out or push it out through our clients is through the software, but we include all 4 of the mandatory training programs, AOTA, which is more connected to human rights code or whatnot, but AOTA training is included with our HR program, and from a health and safety standpoint, we include the Ministry of Labor Health and Safety Awareness Training Program, Violence in the Workplace Training Program, and the WMIS Training Program are all provided as part of the onboarding process. And they're also available on an ongoing basis beyond that for update.
Perfect, exactly, Brian. And there's also the potential to have conversations with Peninsula about rolling out your documents, okay, in person. So certainly that's a conversation that I'm happy to have with anyone, and I will likely reach out to you. Thank you for your question. Now, BrightSafe, this is what we're looking at here. BrightSafe is a small piece of our software sort of package, okay? We certainly have two sides of the software programs. We have BrightHR and we have BrightSafe. So BrightSafe speaks to the HR programming. That speaks to Andrew's side. It's where we house your employment contracts, your employee handbook, probably a copy of your health and safety manual and any other documents we've prepared. It is where we take sick day requests, vacation time requests, log in, log out, okay? Very important, even if employees are working from home, probably not a terrible strategy to put in place. But on this piece that you're looking at here, this is BrightSafe. So this is on Brian's side of the service. BrightSafe speaks to how you work your health and safety program. We need to have a place to report our hazards so that our hazards are not lost, okay? There is a clock that starts counting down when an employee reports a hazard to you. It needs to be addressed, and we really want that to become a file that we can now follow along. So BrightSafe gives you the ability to not only manage things like risk assessments, document storage, hazard reporting. You will find the e-learning modules also in BrightSafe, like Brian mentioned. So this is where the mandatory and a few other health and safety related training modules exist. And again, these all are part of our program. There's a few that aren't represented so far on these slides. Also, like it's called POP, it is expense tracking. It is quite lovely, as well as Blip. This is how we give clients the ability to have employees log in and log out. So again, all part of the suite of service. I think it's quite lovely, and I'm happy to offer a demo to anyone who would be certainly interested after the webinar. All right, next slide, please. So this is just a small look. Again, typically one of the questions along the way is obviously, how much does the program cost, right? Very obvious, this is a paid service. Now, based on your membership with ACEC, you do receive a member discount. It's quite substantial. The discount is represented here in the rates. You can see typically for a business of 5 employees, our program starts at about $288 per month. Now, ACEC has very kindly pre-negotiated these rates on your behalf, so your monthly rate would be $246. The program fees are based on a few pieces of criteria. One, how many employees do you have? I personally think this is a great way to price our program based on the fact that if someone has 200 employees, they should probably be paying more than someone who has 3. Right? So it is fair. It also is based on how long you hire Peninsula for. So I'm happy to go through these criteria with you, certainly at any time. Okay. Now, next slide, please. Now, I would suggest something that you might expect after the webinar is you would likely receive a call from one of our consultants here at Peninsula. I think Noah might be one of the first people to reach out to you. Noah's lovely. I work very closely with him. Okay. His goal would be to set up time for you in the next few days to offer you like a one-on-one consultation. Now, in the consultation, someone like Brian or Andrew or myself will be going through any questions you may have. So if you just have a question about a situation, maybe something's going on in the workplace right now, and you definitely want to just understand where you should go next, feel free to reach out and ask us. There are no obligations. If you do love the idea of the service, certainly at some point through that conversation, we are happy to go through what it means to actually hire Peninsula. Okay, so it's a great opportunity. We can go through your policies that you have in place, talk about what you might want to add, and then certainly explain how we can add those for you. Okay, now next slide. We did have the one question we went through. I believe we have a couple more minutes. Aileen, did you want to go through a couple more questions?
Yep, absolutely. One of them came up, Brian, it may be for you, with hybrid workers now. So this firm, I think, has many people working from home. Do you still need to have a health and safety program in place?
Well, it's a very good question, and it's actually a question that a lot of people are asking because the whole remote model is a kind of a new work environment that really health and safety hasn't had to deal with in a great manner in the past, well, 10, 15 years. But right now, the simple answer is yes, you are required to have that because the legislation still says you're required to have that. So if you have 25 employees and they're all working remotely, the legislation will say you're required to have a joint health and safety committee. There's nothing that says your 25 remote employees are exempt from that. So until there's legislation that has caught up and supports the remote work environment, the legislation that we have to deal with is the only one that I can recommend and support. So until there's legislation that says differently, right now you would still be required to have the same minimum requirements as a brick and mortar operation.
Okay, perfect. And this one maybe Shelley or Andrew, but this firm, they only have 3 employees. So do they need to have things we talked about today?
I can definitely do that. Yeah. There's probably more harm than good in not having it, right? Yes, 3 employees. So again, you feel probably pretty close. You guys know each other. You've been around. Everybody's happy. Which is great, but then you might want to keep that status quo. So yes, documentation I would still say is key. Doesn't matter if you have 1 employee, 2 employees, or 20 employees. Contracts of employment set the terms and conditions, and if you don't have one, you open yourself up to that legality where they can go seek more if it doesn't work out.
Okay, perfect. And Shelley, on that slide, it showed 5 employees, but the question here is if they have 1 employee, the pricing would be for 1 employee. Is that right?
That is correct. It's 1 to 5.
Okay, perfect. Okay, that's it. Those are the questions we got today, everyone. So thank you again to everyone who took the time to join us today. Thank you to ACEC Ontario and our partnership with them. And of course, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Shelley, for speaking on the webinar today. We will be in touch. As Shelley mentioned, Noah will be in touch and a consultant will be in touch to book a complimentary consultation with you. And please, you have our 1-800 number that's dedicated to ACEC Ontario members. Please reach out and let us know if you have any questions. We hope you found today's session valuable. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we will be in touch.